Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this episode on all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, wherever this episode makes it to YouTube, do remember to click subscribe. Brothers and sisters and friends, today's guest is a very interesting one. Having him on this show and on this platform will most certainly cause a stir amongst various factions and constituencies of the Muslim and the non-Muslim community. He is a controversial figure. He also once was a national icon of a particular spectrum of political leaning. He was the former leader of the British Nationalist Party. He is now with the Freedom and Alliance Party, and he was a former MEP. How do we forget? He was a former member of the European Parliament for the Northwest, and a infamous figure to some extent, and an icon that represents the far right of English politics. Or does he still? We'll find out. And that's none other than Nick Griffin. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are things?
Things are good, thank you very much. Looking forward to the show.
What do you think about how this engagement came about? Did you have any reservations?
I didn't have any reservations. If you told me a few years ago, I thought, no, that's very unlikely. Although I think people should understand that everything they think they know about me has come about through the lens that people like the BBC put on in the first place. So even the things you think you know actually weren't necessarily true. And on Twitter in the last few months, I've got now an amazing engagement with Muslims. And I keep on getting people who say, well, when I was young, you were the bogeyman. I was terrified of you. And I think I understand why. It's a shame, and I hope that perhaps at the end of this, I'm sure we're not going to agree on everything, but at least perhaps people understand that I'm a dimensional character, the same as you, not the single dimension portrayed by the media.
I hope that in this conversation, this engagement, that there's a sense of at least acknowledgement why a certain perception of you exists. Mm-hmm. When I told my father that I'm doing this podcast, he told me, you're speaking to Nick Griffin, who people of my generation believe he was a significant contributor towards the mindset of Paki bashing, of beating up Asian lads, troubling taxi drivers, restaurant workers, someone who made life difficult for British Asians and Muslims. That was my father's initial, and so I hope that in this conversation you can at least acknowledge that certain things were said and done in the past. That gives you that reputation that you do have.
I can understand that perception entirely. I'd say that if people thought that I was there causing trouble, there was a number of times in different towns, Bradford as one example, where I've turned up to meetings where there was so much anger and rage, particularly about the grooming issue, but also racist attacks on white lads, that the local community was at boiling point. And I'm there saying, yes, there's a problem. The problem needs addressing. But it's not the whole community, and you won't address it with violence. There has to be a political road, and the people most to blame are our politicians, our police, our media. So get involved in politics and put it right. I would say I've constantly, over a long career, I've taken young white men who are on the verge of that, and I've given them a political road to go down rather than violence.
We'll speak about that political road, but let me just kick off today's podcast by just getting a kind of a flow of inside the thoughts of Nick Griffin. I'm going to ask you, or mention the names of 10.5 figures. You're gonna find out why I consider one of them a half a human being. Some have passed away, some are still living, and I want you to just tell the viewers your initial thoughts when I mention their names.
Okay.
St. George.
And the dragon. St. George, the patron saint of England, introduced by the Normans. Our patron saint really is St. Edmund, who predates him. Obviously, the left and the PC say, oh, how stupid these English are. They've got a patron saint who's Turkish.
Palestinian.
Palestinian Christian. So not Turkish.
But not white like you either.
Not white, no.
More bit olivey, perhaps more closer to my complexion.
Probably. I'll tell you, when many years ago I was in Libya, after 4 days in Libya, I was far more olive and darker than most of my hosts.
Okay.
St. George is an intensely powerful figure to English people who've lost all other sense of religion and roots. So don't go around dissing St. George. Nobody should do. But yeah, it's a paradox, isn't it, that our beloved patron saint was actually a Palestinian Christian.
Pope Urban II.
Pope Urban II was an example of Christian expansionism and imperialism. And obviously I'm a Christian. And on one side, I think, well, yes, we should expand and give you people the chance to have the true faith and be saved and so on. But on the other hand, I recognise that expansionist Christianity can actually make for bad neighbours. So without Christianity, look at the West now. It's a shambles of disbelief, abortion, drugs, all sorts of horrors. So you need Christianity, Western society. There's a point at which, if it is so intensely believed, or it becomes intertwined with material ambitions of men or organisations, it makes itself a bad neighbour. And I think the same can be true. Islam also is an expansionist religion for all the right reasons in your people's minds, but it can also, under certain circumstances, be misused by men who take it for their own advantage, and it can also be a bad neighbour. I think Pope Urban II, I believe that there was justification for the Crusades, but Pope Urban obviously largely kicked that off, but I certainly don't believe that he was a saint.
Okay. Richard the Lionheart.
He's another one of these Normans who everybody thinks is English. Didn't even speak English, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, again, he's a romantic figure who's part of our past and our identity. And I think that part of the romance, certainly the Victorians got it, and people, when I was a lad still, Richard the Lionheart was a sort of figure that you learned about in primary school and so on. And part of the story was that this man was so confident and so chivalrous that he'd sit down with the other side, with Saladin. Saladin sent him a horse, respecting his bravery on the battlefield.
And a doctor when he was unwell.
And a doctor when he was unwell, yes. So Richard the Lionheart, to me, is despite the fact he's a Norman, he's a Christian figure who fought for his beliefs and against Islam, but not in a psychotic and a disrespectful way. And I think, therefore, that although he's a long time in the past, he's certainly a figure who won't be forgotten in the future.
Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler is one of the causes of all our misfortunes now. He came about because primarily the French at the end of the First World War imposed a monstrous peace treaty in Germany. So the peace was only a temporary armistice, so it made Hitler...
This is Versailles we're talking about.
Yes, the Treaty of Versailles. It made Hitler inevitable. Hitler came to power on the basis of a series of promises which, if fulfilled, and a manifesto, if fulfilled, would have made Germany a powerhouse, but also a peaceful place. One of them, for instance, was the abolition of the standing army, the creation of a citizens' militia, so strong that Germany couldn't be, a little bit like Switzerland, so strong that Germany couldn't be invaded, but there wouldn't have been the machinery to conquer anybody else. And to my mind, Hitler went completely wrong in 1934. He had a choice. He's given a choice. The revolution is just completed. He had a choice between you side with the Junkers, with the industrialists, with the big landowners, or you side with the people who put you in power. And he sided with big money, which he needn't have done. He had enough power at that stage. He could have sided with the others. If he'd sided with the others, then the land which an expanding German population need to create this ideal utopian society of the German sturdy peasant working his own land with his own family there and so on in his own plot, that land should have come at the expense of the big landowners in eastern Germany. It should not have come at the expense of the Slavs. But Hitler had that xenophobic approach, so he completed he wasn't wholly responsible for the Second World War. The usual banker culprits, the French, the section of the British elite, all of them were involved in creating that war, but Hitler made it inevitable there'd be that war, and coming so close on the back of the First and the Second World War, really a European brothers' war, is the thing which is...
many Muslim colonial subjects fought.
Which many fought in as well. But in terms of a percentage of the population,
European,
it didn't begin to touch. Right? Was it 90,000 Indians died fighting for Britain in the Second World War?
No, it was entirely a European war.
But it was a European war. It's a European civil war, and it drastically weakened us, our people. And I say Hitler bears a significant part of the guilt for that, but not all the guilt.
Have you ever, throughout your life, gravitated towards sympathising with him or his ideology?
I read,
at any point?
I read Mein Kampf when I was 15 because my grandfather had a copy. And this was in the National Front, and I saw Hitler the man. And I found the whole thing boring, other than the chapter on or 2 chapters on propaganda were quite interesting. Mm-hmm. But no, I had very little sympathy. And by the age of 18, the youngsters who were taking over the National Front at the time, we discovered through English patriotic writers, we discovered Gregor and Otto Strasser, who were the socialist side of the National Socialist movement, and had no time for Hitler at all because he exiled one and murdered the other.
Oswald Mosley.
Oswald Mosley was a great British politician with one of the worst senses of timing of all British politicians. He should have been a Prime Minister. He's much demonised. And obviously he's now presented as the appalling anti-Semite and all the rest.
Even on Peaky Blinders.
But particularly on Peaky Blinders.
Yeah.
And when you actually read what he was saying, he was a man of great vision. Mussolini said to him, look, don't put on the black shirt, don't go on this fascist road, it's thoroughly un-British, the British won't take to it. And although Mussolini funded him to very large sums of money for several years, Mosley went and did this thing. He'd been advised by a foreigner, the Brits won't take to it. And of course the Brits really didn't take to it, which was a shame. I think if Mosley had a better sense of political timing and a better sense of reality, he quite likely could have become a Prime Minister. And I think that the whole world would be a better place, because he wasn't just interested in Britain and so on. He was also looking at, we're here with this end times colonialism. What do we do with it? And so on. And he wasn't there for looting the third world, as it wasn't even the third world. He wasn't there for looting the colonists. He got a huge issue with the banking system, with usury. And it wasn't a code word for Jews. He had a huge problem with this. And if he'd come to power and had dealt with the usury system at the heart of the City of London, then I think British colonialism would have come to an end anyway.
Do you not?
It would have come to an end in a more orderly way. And I think straight away, basically, the Third World was freed from colonialism and then got economic colonialism, which actually means you get all the worst, you don't get any of the benefits. Mosley wouldn't have had that.
Because Muslims still very much believe, and many from the global south still very much believe, that there is still economic colonialism and imperialism.
Oh, yeah.
The resources that belong to the indigenous people of those lands, that oil which functions and funds the Western civilization, belongs primarily to the Muslims of that region. But you have massive British and American corporations like BP and so forth that come and suck the resources out. So what we're saying is that you're right, from a military point of view, there's still military bases in the Muslim world. You don't see any Muslim military bases in the Western world, but you see British and American military bases in the Muslim world. So there still are colonial outposts. That's how they're seen. Whether
they're right. They're right. What could I just say there, though? That long before the City of London elite started conquering and stealing from the rest of the world, they stole from the English. They stole literally 1/3 of the land of England. You drive out somewhere, you could look at all those fields around every village. 1/3 of everything you see was owned in common by the people until it was stolen by the elite, who then used that wealth they got from taking us. And they did the same in Wales, the same in Scotland, the same in Ireland as well. Then they used that and they stole from the rest of the world. But don't think that your specially aggrieved cases, they did that to us before they did it to you.
It's an aggrieved case for us because it's generally quite civilizational, whether we want to accept it or not. It's a civilized. I know we're digressing a bit, but it's because when you speak about the Islamic perspective, you have to understand that we were a competing civilization. We were very much present and leading humanity in many aspects. In fact, when Christianity or Christian Europe was in the Dark Ages, you had Andalus, you had Muslim Spain and Abbasid Baghdad. There's no denying that. It's in our own history book. So when you talk about an aggrieved position, the Muslim position is a particularly aggrieved position because we see it as civilizational. But we can get to that later on. Nigel Farage.
He's the heavyweight politician of this era. In fact, he's a very good politician. I'm not saying he's a good man. He's very lucky. He did a deal with the BBC, basically. Nigel Farage, he was, from the early 80s, he was there with UKIP which was unheard of at any time other than European elections. And then this is an election in which very few people vote.
Why was that? There wasn't really a grassroots following to begin with.
There's no ideological basis. You have to have an ideological basis, I think, for to amass the party activists who create an organic thing that goes forward. Farage didn't have that. So it was just a protest vote at European election times. And it would have stayed there without any real significance were it not for the fact that Farage, or rather the BBC particularly, came to Farage. And we had people who were heavily involved in the upper circles of UKIP at the time. So absolutely genuine, this. They came to Farage and they were so scared of me and the British National Party. And they tried stopping us, the left had tried stopping us with smears, with violence. They tried the question time, have Griffin on, let him speak and expose himself. The consequences of that, there's a left-wing myth that...
Do you think they were successful in that?
Well, there's only one thing, and that's what did the public think. And before question time, we'd never been above 6% in the opinion polls. The week after question time, a proper serious opinion poll had us on 22%. Mm-hmm. So it was shattering to the BBC because this thing didn't work, what they thought was going to work. So after that, they never had me on again, ever, unless absolutely forced to by electoral law. But they promoted Nigel Farage. They had me once on question time in a public lynching, and they had him on 22 times. They put him on Have I Got News for You? So the BBC...
He's on I'm a Celebrity now.
Yeah, now he's on I'm Celebrity. So the media, which is intensely pro-EU, pushed this man up. And they did that, and the agreement they had with him was, we will promote you and UKIP. You'll talk about immigration as if it's your issue and so on, but don't actually talk about third world immigration. Don't talk about Muslim immigration. He didn't for a long, long time. Does now. But then he didn't. He was actually speaking only about Eastern European immigration. And then they made the public think he's against all immigration. He was deliberately promoted in order to stop me and the BNP. So he's very lucky. Without me, this isn't big-headed, it's a simple fact, without the perceived threat of me, and actually we were never that kind of a threat.
We'll get to that.
Left untouched, we'd have got five...
A threat to who? The establishment?
A threat to the establishment.
Okay.
So left untouched, we'd have got 5 or 6 MEPs. That would have been it. And the whole European parliamentary system is designed to suck people in and give them such a good time, then neutralised. So it wouldn't have had any long-term effect. But by panicking so much about me and the BNP, they promoted Farage. He was very lucky. Because of that, he got this incredibly big vote in the 2014 European election. And that, in the end, Cameron thought, well, there's now such a threat to our vote, we've got to give this referendum, which I'm sure we'll win. And they misunderstood the fact that there's a big block of the British blue-collar election, English in particular, who had given up on politics except on this one issue.
You supported Brexit?
Absolutely, pro-Brexit. So Farage, none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the fact that Farage had this deal with the BBC. But the fact that he was able to get it, the fact he's cynical enough to have it and turn it to his advantage, say he's a really heavyweight politician, and I suspect he's not finished yet. Which is bad news because as well as doing deals with the BBC, he's from the class that is innately sympathetic to Zionism and big money around the world. And the way that our society is going, he's yet got the potential to be a menace to all of us.
Stephen Yaxley Lennon, a.k.a. Tommy Robinson.
A.k.a. Tommy Robinson. Tommy, I think he's got a sort of Irish charm. If he'd grown up in England 20, 30 years before when he did, instead of going to a comprehensive where he came up with nothing, he'd have gone to a grammar school, he'd have come out with a good education and a career path, and we'd never have heard of him. And he probably is still living in a nice house in Bedfordshire or whatever. But he was picked as someone who could front this wholly inorganic English Defence League, which from the very beginning was...
How was the relationship between BNP and EDL?
A Zionist front.
BNP and EDL, what was the general relationship between the two?
Hostile from the very beginning. They were, and bear in mind, they emerged in 2009, really the big one, within a few weeks of us making the only really significant electoral breakthrough in British nationalism in its entire history. And all of a sudden they're emerging, basically saying to people, come with us on the streets. And it sucked away from us people who'd have come in as activists and 18 months or 2 years later would have been local organisers, local officials and so on. So we had there was a twin track strategy used against us. On the one side, the posh, respectable side, there was UKIP taking the votes, and on the other side there were these people sucking the lifeblood out of our new recruitment base from the grassroots. But regardless of our attitude with them, the simple fact is that that whole operation was set in motion at Alan Lake's flat in the Barbican and so on by a group of people who were wholly owned employees of American-based neocon Zionist foundations. It's a very, very clever piece of politicking, and it's very wicked and very, very dangerous.
The last individual, and now it will make sense why I said a half, the weasel, Douglas Murray.
Half a man, not a man at all. He's Britain's equivalent of Ben Shapiro in the States, and he's there because he's out of the same stable as Tommy Robinson, exactly. But Tommy's there to appeal to the masses, and the English, of course, and the British in general, have this deeply ingrained class thing. So there's no prospect of middle-class lads or middle-class people respecting or following Tommy Robinson because he's an oik. So Douglas Murray is there to do the same thing.
Let's kick off the podcast. I'm going to ask you squarely, simply because it would be unjust. From a regulatory point of view, we're regulated by an organisation called Impress, who will no doubt will look into this interview and question why certain things may or may not be asked. Do you hate Jews, Nick?
No. There's people out there who do hate Jews, and they're having a field day at present with what the Zionists are doing in Gaza. There's people who do. And those people, everything's the fault of the Jews, and there's no good Jews.
That's not your position.
No, I constantly, genuinely, again on Twitter and so on, I'm pointing out that there are good Jews. Some of the most effective criticism of Zionism and Talmudism comes from men, it has done for years. Benjamin Friedman, Israel Shamir, they're now both dead. But you look at people like Gilad Atzmon now. There's these people, Ron Unz, who does, I believe, the best English language written material on the internet is the Unz Review, UNZ. People should look at it. And he's Jewish. So, no, I'm not one who says that all Jews are utterly evil. But I do believe that obviously we've got a problem with Zionism. And I believe that Zionism is the political expression of a strand within that community which is deeply hostile, particularly to Christians, but also obviously in the context of Palestine. They can't help themselves but be hostile to anybody else who's in the land between the Nile and the Euphrates, because they believe that is given to them by God and that it's special because they're the only real human beings. So I think that's a racism which is a menace, but I do not for 1 minute believe that all Jews are like that, because there's people on the left in particular with whom I disagree probably on most other things. There's left-wing Jews who are saying, no, Zionism is wicked and unjust and there has to be a proper, fair settlement with the Palestinians. And then there's some religious Jews, the ones who, some of the most hardcore ones, who say that for man to have created Zionism and a Jewish state is a blasphemy. So we want it dismantled.
So that's Neturei Carter and these guys.
Yes, people like that. And they're not a vast section, but they're a genuine section. And then there's secular right-wing Jews like Ron Unz and so on, who are saying all the right things in a more informed way than anyone in my society or yours. So no, I've got no problem with those people at all. Far from it. I constantly say to people, look at them and don't go down the road of thinking that they're all the spawn of Satan or whatever, stuff like that.
Now look, I can totally understand why Zionists weaponize anti-Semitism to silence and censor any critique or opposition to the occupying entity of Israel. From an Islamic perspective, and I want to just make this clear because there'll be people from your constituency tuning into this podcast, the Islamic position is that Christians and Jews are people of the book. We share a tradition from the perspective that Muslims affirm the prophets of the past from the children of Israelites. We affirm the Torah, the Psalms, the Bible, and of course the final untampered message to humanity being the Quran. There are many passages in the Quran where Allah talks about Bani Israel, the children of Israelites, as the chosen people of that time. And I think this is something which Zionists purposely twist. That when God in the Quran talks about Bani Israel, the children of Israelites, He, Azza wa Jal, is talking about them from the perspective that they were the chosen people of that time. They were the people of Moses, of Noah, of Abraham, of Jacob, of Joseph, and so forth. May God's and peace and blessings be upon them all. And God talks about them from a point of reflection and reformation, that do not commit the mistakes that they did when they were the chosen people. They did things, they rebelled. Don't go down that rabbit hole. In fact, there's a prophetic statement where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that, look, Muslims, you will follow the ways of the Jews and Christians, and you will make the same mistakes like they would. So this has been prophesied. There is no hatred for Jews. There's no plan to exterminate Jews. If it was the Chinese Communist Party occupying Palestine, if it was the Hindutva Indians, if it was Christian Protestants occupying Palestine, the opposition, the occupation, and the opposition to it would be the same. It just happens to be the fact that the divine chronology of events that played out was that there is an occupying settler Zionist entity in the heartlands of the Muslim majority world, when there is 1,000-year plus history of Jews flourishing in Islamic civilization, whether it be Abbasid Baghdad, Andalusian Spain, Ottoman Istanbul. But look at the history of Jews in Europe. That's where you will see exile, 1,000 years of distrust, because of alleged accusations of the internal turmoil that they had caused as a result of loans and stuff like this. I'm just saying that's there. But in terms of the Islamic perspective, there is no plan to exterminate Jews. Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph of Islam, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Saladin, they invited the Jews back and wanted them to stay there and worship and stuff like this. The issue is Zionism. The issue is that settler colonialism. The issue is that apartheid regime. That needs to be dismantled. And I believe, and the Muslims believe, that is something that we must resist against. Do you believe all Jews control the media?
No, I don't believe all Jews control all the media. I know as a simple fact that vast swathes of the commercial, private, public, shareholder-owned media in the Western world are owned by Jews. And I don't know whether they're Zionist or not, but I know they're Jewish. And you look at the early life section in Wikipedia, and it's not wall to wall, but it's most of them. And the same is true with Hollywood, for example. The same is true with pornography. These are simple facts. So it's not, do I believe that these people have a disproportionate representation in these fields? I simply know that they have. But it's not all Jews, and I don't blame all Jews for that. In fact, I regard it,
many would regard just this very conversation as anti-Semitic simply because they'll say that you're fulfilling anti-Semitic
tropes.
Tropes and conspiracy theories about global Jewry. About controlling the world.
So they do say that, right? I'd say this, that's one of their defense mechanisms, is to say, oh, you criticize us, but you're criticizing all Jews. It's exactly the same. The mafia is and has been at different stages a genuine criminal organization. And in America recently, it hasn't been all Italian by any means. Back down the rabbit hole.
Early New York, there were Jewish mobs.
Indeed, I didn't want to say that. It could be taken as being anti-Semitic. It's a simple fact. Yeah. But looking in Italy when it started, or Italy now, all the mafia are Italians. The bosses and the hitmen, all the rest of it, they're all Italians.
Sicilian or
Sicilian, Indrata and so on.
Yep.
But you can criticise the mafia. You could go to war politically and organisationally and legally with the mafia to destroy it, and you wouldn't be attacking Italians. And it's the same thing, basically, the Zionist and the Sanhedrin type Talmudic priesthood, the self-appointed religious community groups like the Board of Deputies, British Jews and so on. These people have weaponised the anti-Semitism argument, not only to stop criticism, but also to herd their own people into accepting their rule, into giving them money. And basically within that community you've got these self-appointed, self-perpetuating mafia gangster type operations, and their own community are the victims of it before even the rest of us are. But no, I do believe that it's not just Europe has a deeper problem with the Jews than the Muslims do, because they don't in the Talmud talk about your prophet as boiling for eternity in hell in a big vat of human excrement, like they do with Jesus. So,
But it's also because Islam banned usury as well.
and of course, Islam banned usury.
The Prophet
yes.
Muhammad, peace be upon him, he banned
Yes,
usury in the
yeah.
markets of Medina.
One of the we would have a far, far better world if there was no usury. You can talk about imperialism and the British Army, or even the IDF or whatever. Far more damaging to most of the world for most of history has been usury.
So you're anti-capitalist then?
Yes,
To some extent.
Yes, certainly anti-finance capitalism. Capitalism is one of those things. It's a terrible system, but there's aspects of it are better than any of the other systems that might be tried. But it's a great servant. It's an appalling master. And the usury side of it, the idea, so private enterprise and so on.
Can capitalism function without usury? I'm asking, what do you think?
I think there is a serious problem there. I don't think capitalism, probably could function without usury. It can't function without an expanding population and expanding production.
Can it function with the fiat without the fiat currency?
I think it would function better.
Without the fiat currency?
Yes, because the fiat currency is intimately connected with usury, and they become a drain on productivity. So they're sucking the lifeblood out of the economy, and the whole economy is designed to be making money. If you had a capitalist system which is designed and intended to fulfill human needs, I think you've got to have the private personal incentive for people to run it. So you can't statify it and go down the communist road. But I don't see that you have to have an economic system whose primary base is there to make money upon money.
Do you believe in the superiority of the white race?
The white race is a hugely broad spectrum. So first of all, no, never have done. Secondly, God created all men are equal in the sight of God. So even if you say to someone...
You believe we all come from Adam and Eve?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So if you say that one group is superior to the other, then
Intellectually, physically...
intellectually. Certainly, it is not true morally. And I've met many very intelligent, very intellectual Brits and so on, university professors. They can hardly tie their shoelaces in the real world. So just because they're highly clever, highly intellectual, or someone might be highly productive, create some brilliant invention, doesn't make them better than any ordinary person, so not superior. I do think that if you look historically, the Indo-Europeans in general and the Northwest Europeans in particular have been the driving force of creating the modern world. If you took everything out of the studio that comes originally from a designer more like me than you, we're sitting in a field. That's it. So I do believe that for a variety of reasons...
Not Islamic civilization, no? Not Islamic civilization?
Of course there was Islamic situation. But none of what's surrounding us now other than the walls. That's it. So I do believe that the peoples of Northwestern Europe have made, in the past, a disproportionate contribution towards the development of modern civilization, which is not an entirely unalloyed good. Yeah, they created the bad as well, TNT and all the rest of it. But in terms of thought, architecture, music, technology, an awful lot of it's for our people. Having said that, looking at my people now, I see this is a people who once bestrode the world, again, for good and for ill. And now they're a deracinated, godless, heathen, just a pathetic mass of dying humanity. So I don't believe in white supremacy now. As I say, we have in the past. We have in the past made great contributions. I'm not saying I've changed my mind. I'm saying in the past there was something really special about especially the Northwest Europeans through a long period of history. And looking at them now, has gone.
How do you explain then? By the way, I'm not necessarily. If you're talking about the ancient Greeks, the Romans, fine. But what about the Dark Ages of Europe, where you were killing women for being witches, and the Bible wasn't even translated to the native languages, and Islam was leading humanity and civilization for 1,000 years in terms of geometry and algebra and science and architecture and reviving Greek texts. In fact, the Renaissance would not have happened if there was no Crusades. The Crusaders came to the Muslim world, found out, hey, these guys are pretty smart, and they've revived our literature and they came back. You had the Renaissance. Had there been no Crusaders and no interaction with the Muslims, there wouldn't have been a Renaissance. Had there been no Renaissance, there would not be no Enlightenment. Had there been no Enlightenment, Enlightenment, there'd be no colonialism. I know that's a very simplified.
It's very simplified.
But is there truth in what I said there?
There's a degree of truth.
Okay.
There's also a fact the Dark Ages were not that dark. This is
you were killing women for witches.
Actually, that wasn't in the Dark Ages. That's post-Dark Ages.
Okay,
that's
fine.
in early modern Europe.
We gave Muslim women political emancipation in the 7th century.
Yeah.
Abayat al-Nisa. The women gave the Pledge of Allegiance to Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago. She had property rights. She had many other rights.
And women in pre-conquest England, for instance, pre-1066, women in the ancient, even actually pre-Christian societies, had a great deal more genuine and worthwhile quality in terms of it wasn't presented they were same as men. But
do you not like the Battle of Hastings?
But a woman, I do not know. But the women were quite entitled to own property. Women weren't regarded as inferior if it came into a court, and so on.
Why did that happen for many centuries in Christian Europe?
That change came later, and it certainly came after the Enlightenment. So if you're saying the Enlightenment came from Islam, then you'd have to get the blame for that, which I'm not trying to give you.
No, you could get the inspiration from it by all means. Jean-Jacques Rousseau and many other Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke, they took inspiration from Islamic thinkers like Imam Ghazali, Avicenna, many others. But the point I'm trying to say is you can take an inspiration from something, you can't blame it on that.
Yes, true. I don't think Rousseau was anything to be proud of whatsoever.
Yeah, but no, social contract theory and stuff like this.
In the end, he's one of the fathers of modern liberalism, which is utterly pernicious. So I think that the high period of the high period of European civilization was actually in late medieval times, and obviously some things, aspects of architecture and thought and algebra and so on, did come back from the Muslim world, where Europe was hit particularly by the collapse that followed the destruction of Rome, whereas the ancient culture, civilization and learning stayed on in Byzantium. And I think that a large part of what Europe later on took from Islam, because quite a lot of it came from after that period. So Byzantium, the second Rome, was where the great culture and learning that Europe had in the later Roman times, coming from the Greeks, that's where it was preserved. The collapse of Rome, obviously no one has to blame for that, but I think it should be a dire warning to people living in the West. That is where we're headed. We're headed demographically for such a huge bust, for a whole variety of reasons, that we face the risk of a civilizational collapse on that scale. And if that is the case, then extremely conservative and faithful Muslims will resist that better than others. But I think you'd still be swept away in the flood, just this disaster that faces Western Europe.
People see, many Muslims at least, the vast majority of Muslims see the existence of the occupying entity of Israel as an American colonial outpost.
Yeah.
It was created by Arthur Balfour. At least the stages of it were set at that time. It also coincided with the downfall and the collapse of the Ottoman Caliphate after World War I. And they see that as an American colonial outpost. Do you think that relationship between the American establishment and what you describe as powerful Zionist Jews, do you think that relationship could ever be severed?
I doubt it.
Why?
Because in the end, it's about money more than anything else. There is I don't wholly go down the tinfoil hat stuff of the Western elites all being Satan worshippers and so on, but there is something very, very dark in what they do and how they behave. So no, I think that those two groups are so intertwined. They're intertwined by interest, by history, by habit and by blood. I don't think they can be separated. So whether someone wants to call it the Zionist entity or America, it doesn't really make any difference. It's the same thing.
Okay.
And it's a menace. It's a menace to all of us. And I understand at present people will say, well, how can you equate the impact of American global power on Britain with babies being blown apart in Gaza? It's an unfair equation.
There's no correlation.
So there's no correlation, but they've set my people on the road to extinction.
Who are your people?
My people are...
Do you see me as one of your people?
No, I see you as British. Yeah. You can't be English any more than I could become Pakistani, or my great-grandchildren couldn't become Pakistani if they moved to Pakistan, because it's an ethnic term I know within Pakistan you've got the ethnic groups beyond, but forgive my ignorance.
Yeah.
So from our point of view, British is a civic thing, which anyone who obeys certain rules and hopefully contributes and values this country in some way for all its faults.
Are we allowed to criticize? Are we allowed to criticize the government?
Of course you can criticize it,
Are we allowed to
absolutely.
criticize policies?
Yes, absolutely so.
Should we be afforded the same rights?
Yes, absolutely so. Because you're British citizens and there's rights and responsibilities. As long as you take the responsibilities, you must also have the rights. Otherwise, it's a one-way thing, and it's just, apart from being wrong, it's going to create resentment and all sorts. So, yes, of course you're British, but you're not English any more than I'm not Scottish. I've got, according to my DNA, 3-4% Scottish. That doesn't make me Scottish. And so that's the position there. So just to wind it up, that yes...
On the racial hierarchy thing, let's wrap up.
Okay, all right.
Do you believe, do you believe, not about the contributions, not about how civilization was led or anything, do you believe in the actual genetical superiority of a particular race over the other?
No. But I believe that all races and all cultures have a right to self-determination and a right to exist and the duty to stand up for themselves without wanting to go and kill other people.
Why do you centre that around race and ethnicity? Let me explain to you why. Because the Prophet Muhammad upon be peace, in his final sermon, Nick, think about this, of all the things to include in his final sermon upon whom be peace, he chose to say the following: no Arab is more superior than a non-Arab. No black man is superior than a white man, and nor the other way around, except for in God consciousness and good deeds. That is a very explicit statement from the Prophet to include in his in his final sermon. The verbatim quote will be on the screen, that there is no superiority between an Arab and a non-Arab, and there's no superiority between a black man and white man. Why do you define this collective identity around race as opposed to, let's say, Christianity?
I don't completely, as a tendency to, but you're saying you identify exactly as this. I said right at the start that white covers a huge range, and Christianity is very, very important. Obviously you're white without being Christian, but you're not a fully fledged member of our culture, our society.
Granted.
And you've got a reason. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about someone who isn't a Christian, but they're white. They're missing something, because they haven't got the faith of their forefathers. So what your prophet said there, 100% right, I agree with that. But just because there is someone African who's as good as a Brit, doesn't mean that we automatically have to accept the influx of millions of Africans and our replacement by Africans, because I happen to think that's a bad thing. That's not because I'm hostile to Africans. I've got African friends. And smallish numbers, again, they can be part of a society. But if you're, as we're facing now, the demographically dying Europe, we're told we have to import 100 million, 200 million Africans over the next 30, 40 years in order to keep the capitalist system going. Well, thank you. I'd rather not have the capitalist system, because that would destroy my culture and my people.
And we are going to delve into a lot of that in this segment, because now we're entering that segment where many eyes from my community are going to be watching this part.
Yep.
And that is to do with your stances, past and present, statements from past and present, or past mainly, with regards to Islam and Muslims. You have recently come up on people's Twitter feeds in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Since Gaza kicked off, I'm hearing and seeing Nick Griffin's coming up on our Twitter feed. And people like what you're saying about Israel, and you know, highlighting the crimes of the Zionist entity and the various nefarious agendas in terms of how it's, poisoned British politics and British autonomy in terms of its foreign policy and so forth. People are liking that. It's also fair to say that those under 30 don't actually know you.
Of course.
Or whatever their perception they have of you is not that of my father.
Yeah.
It's not that of myself, actually. Because when we spoke, I said, Nick, I remember you as a particular icon of a particular time.
Yeah.
And you are seen as someone who's responsible towards contributing towards a very difficult time for Muslims and South Asians. So I want to say a few statements that you have made in the past. If I misquoted you, please correct me, because I don't want to be seen as unjust. And I want to just ask you if you stand by these statements, or if you do, then explain why, and if you don't, then wicked. In August 2001, you wrote in The Identity, a BNP publication, that Muslim clerics wanted militant Muslims to take over British cities with AK-47s. Do you remember writing that?
I don't remember writing it, but I have no doubt you're right.
So quickly,
Yep.
we're in 2023.
Yep.
22 years have passed, and there is no Islamic State of Birmingham or Luton.
Yep.
There are more Muslims, there are more mosques, but there's no one with AK-47s on the streets.
Yep. Right. So, when I was first involved in British nationalist politics, first in the National Front in the 70s, in the age of 15, and through until the late-ish 90s, then a bit later on in the British National Party, we didn't make any differentiation at all between Muslim and Asian. We had a vague sense that, obviously we knew there were Muslims, Sikhs and Hindus here amongst the South Asian population, but we didn't really care. We were thinking that this is something which isn't going to work. Now, I will come precisely to the point, but it takes a little bit of time.
That's fine, get there.
Where I come from.
Get there.
That I was brought up in a household. My father served, he was in the RAF in the Second World War, just a lowly aircraftsman. And he ended up in India, not as a occupying colonialist, just because he was ordered to go there and so on. And he was a radio mechanic. And he was given, what part of his job was to train young Indian volunteers to the RAF, the radio team, how men repair a radio and so on. And he said to me when I was very young, he said I was there, to me then it seemed like a lifetime before, but this was in the middle 60s, so this is only like 15 years before he was there. And he said, I got on really well with these lads, I liked them, yeah, they were my boys, because he's almost a similar age, but he's training them, my lads. Said, and then almost overnight one day, they went from being all just sitting there learning from me, they were killing each other, and then they were going absent without leave and killing each other's families. Because this difference, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim.
Exacerbated by the British.
Exacerbated by the British, but nevertheless, this is, yes, I accept that, but even with that, this is what he saw. I'm trying to explain where I come from. Yeah, that's what he saw. And so he said that that's where multicultural societies can go. They're fundamentally less stable than the Britain, which you're basically looking around most even of London in those days, than there was. And if it carries on, in not that many years' time, you're going to end up with a country which is more and more multicultural, less and less British, white, whatever you want to call it, and it's unstable. And his great fear was that one day the same thing would happen here, this horror. And looking at history, you have to say that, yeah, there's benefits to a multicultural society, but there is a fundamental instability in most of them, and much of history, and it's not just Muslims against Christians, you look in former Yugoslavia. Most of history, if you look at the bloodiest, most horrible wars, they're between when you've got different ethno-cultural religious groups. So why do this to a Britain that's basically stable? Why turn it into this? And that was where that's how I got involved in politics, was the idea that this multicultural mass immigration thing is likely to end badly and it should be stopped and reversed.
But what do you do about the guys that are born here? What do you do about the people that are born here?
Indeed, so in 1994, I did a series of talks. I did a speaking tour of the British National Party just after I first got involved with it, with the same message to every single branch in the country, basically, dozens of them, night after night. I said, look, we've got 20 years. We all know that this thing, we don't like it. We don't like it, not because we hate brown people. People honestly didn't. There's aspects that's wrong to our community, but most of all, this is creating a society which one day is going to go horribly wrong in our country and wreck it. So the civil wars between different ethnic groups, this is going to come. So in 1994, I did this series of talks that said, we've got 20 years in which to turn this around. After that, the demographic shift is so drastic and so rapid that it becomes impossible to turn this thing around through the ballot box. So I said, you've got to get sensible, got to clean up your act, stop all this silly Hitler worship nonsense, all the rest of it. You've got to be serious about doing politics, doing it right, which is what we did. It's how I made the British National Party electable. But that deadline was always there. And we're past the 20 years. So my position is that it shouldn't have been done. It's now too late to reverse it. So we've now got a multicultural society with all sorts of different groups. And none of them is going to be strong enough, even if things go badly wrong, so that one group wants to get rid of the other group one way or another. We are not going to be strong enough. We can't get rid of you, in really crude terms, nor will you get rid of us. And you look at President of the Brits and you think...
But we're not looking to remove
exactly. But even if the cycle of trouble really starts, then you become a moderate. I become a moderate. We get shot by extremists on our own side. before they go and shoot anybody else. That's how communal violence goes.
But just to
it
be
gets
clear,
more and more full of hate.
Muslims have never wanted. Remember, I can't speak. I'm going to talk about Muslims because that's my
Yes,
faith
that's what you
community.
know. Yes.
And by the way, you know when you said that before you never used to differentiate between Asian and Muslim, that's because maybe 70% of all Muslims in the UK are from South Asia. They're either Pakistani
Yes,
or
of course.
Bangladeshi,
Yeah.
right? But Muslims have zero interest in replacing the white race here. Muslims have zero interest in raising the black flag on Downing Street. Muslims genuinely believe, especially in 2023, that British or white Western society will self-implode yourself. You won't need an invading army of Saracens to come do that for you. You will do that yourself, right? So we've never had an interest ever, the demographic shift. When my grandfather came here in 1966, we're going to get back to the point. Yeah?
Yes.
It was never to settle here. And also do remember that many South Asians came upon invitation to rebuild this country after the World War II because the ratio to men and women were problematic. Women were in the labour force. They need to replace that labour force with subjects from the Commonwealth. We came to rebuild this country, right?
You came here, you were brought here as whatever they told you. You were brought here as cheap labour to undermine wages.
And they settled. The money was good.
And there's an element within the powers that have influenced and created mass immigration throughout the Western world, who did it right from the very beginning as a way of destroying the resistance power of the indigenous population and a way of destroying Christianity. Not all of that came about. So I don't blame any of your people or any other group for coming here for a better life for their kids to get on, because Western imperialism and military interference had screwed up large chunks of your countries, all the rest of it.
So the least you can
I don't blame anyone for coming. But coming back then to why I said what I did about
clerics,
Islam, and the clerics, right?
AK-47s.
So, up until 2001, we didn't make any differentiation at all. And this difference, so people think, the BNP started talking about Muslims after September the 11th.
That's the normal perception.
That's the normal perception. It didn't happen like that at all. I was involved in the general election campaign, which would have been May or June that year, in Oldham, where I stood. And during that campaign, we were doing a street one day with leaflets and so on, and a group of young white lads came up to us. So what you doing? So putting out these leaflets. So what's it all about then? So they said. So I said, no, we don't think they should be here in these numbers, and we think it's very unfair how our people are being treated vis-a-vis them. We don't hate them. They said, well, we do. 14 years old. And then they said, we're at school with them. We know what they're like. We hate them. And they said they got in their book, they tell us that in their book, this is their promised land and they're going to take it over.
Lies.
Maybe lies, but I'm explaining where I came from. So I thought, what on earth is this about?
United Kingdom is not mentioned.
I'd never heard anything about this at all. So I thought, well, I'm not going to be shown up by a group of 14-year-olds, or perhaps they're wrong, I don't know. So I went, when I was next in London, I went to Foyles and I said I want an authoritative copy of the Quran, and they sold me one which has got the imprint of the University of Cairo or whatever, and assured me this is a genuine good one and so on. And I read it, literally.
And you mentioned the United Kingdom?
Doesn't mention the United Kingdom, but as a prophecy for Boadicea, the British queen who fought the Romans, that regions that you never know, your descendants will know, and they'll be theirs. So the Victorians took this as a prophecy that they go and conquer the whole, most of the world.
No, but there are
and I could see within this there was a surah that I came about that
you forget about the surah.
I could see where this came from. You know what it is.
No, forget about the surah. God explicitly says in the Quran that today I have completed your faith for you as Islam to dominate over all other religions.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
and there is prophetic statements that say that Islam will enter every single home. There's another prophetic statement that says, I have seen the East and the West, and my ummah, my people, as in my faith and my people, there will be all over the world. So in terms of global domination, that could be seen and interpreted in many ways. That could mean on the one hand, there will be Muslims in every part of the world. Others would say that the dominion of Islam and its systems and its laws will take over one day.
Yeah.
We're talking more towards the end of times, perhaps. So but there is no explicit mention of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, of course there's not.
Or that there is a duty for us here right now to fulfill that prophecy.
Of course there's not. But what I'm saying is, and I don't believe that 14-year-old Muslim lads in Oldham had any concept of Islamic jurisprudence or anything like that. But this is how they viewed it, and when they're winding up their white classmates, this is what they were telling them.
Okay.
So that's why I went and read this book, and I found stuff in it, which yes, it can be interpreted that way. That's how they believe it. And I read the thing cover to cover repeatedly, and there are obviously verses which talk about no compulsion within religion, and there's other verses which are extremely violent. And you've got this as
is the Bible,
as is the Bible,
as is the Torah.
Yeah, as is the indeed so. But I understand, obviously, in the Bible that the violence is mainly in the Old Testament. It's abrogated by Jesus in the New.
Yeah, we don't accept that.
No, of course you don't. But nevertheless, so I read this book, which does have blood-curdling passages, and these women are lawful to you, those your right arm own, and all the rest of it. And so I looked into this, and I'm talking to white liberals and talking to people on pre having a television discussion and so on, and all I get from them is, no, it's a religion of peace. You're making this up, basically. There is no violence there. And I'm reading this thing, and I'm not being told, no, it's written there, but there's an interpretation. I'm being told, you're not reading what you're reading. So I didn't believe this. So I would still maintain that if you had an Islam which was purely based on the Quran, and I know it's to your viewers, it's a holy book and all the rest of it, so I'm not trying to...
It's the Quran and the Sunnah.
I'm not trying to offend people in any way.
But I'm saying that it's not just the Quran.
Yes.
It's the Quran and the prophetic teachings of the Sunnah.
Yes, indeed so.
Muhammad's teachings and actions.
All that I've got at this stage is nobody's saying anything other than when I'm saying, well, look, what is this about? Nobody's saying anything to me other than, shut up, be quiet. You're an Islamophobe. There's no answers at all. All I'm getting from the whole of the British elite is silence or condemnation. No one's discussing this issue. But in those times then, as I was reading it, that's what I could see, and nobody informed me of anything else. And there were hate preachers, obviously. Now I understand that obviously those hate preachers and those who say you can't interpret anything, it's just the Quran and nothing, really nothing else, I understand that that's a minority. And I think I can imagine that with the Gazan thing now, the sheer injustice and inhumanism, how the West is treating it, is actually going to start pushing young Muslim men, 14, 15-year-olds, towards the most fundamentalist, extreme form of Islam you can get, which I now understand that in fact it is interpreted. So it is. I'll say softened. I don't mean soft in a bad way.
Nick,
but at the time, that's where I was coming from, and this was a clear and present danger. And I still believe that there is a danger that strand will come to the forefront. And one of the reasons that I'm outspoken on Gaza and all the issues that go behind it is that if Muslims, especially young Muslims, understand that there are people like me who are trying to be fair and are standing up for what's right, it makes it, I hope, more likely that they'll stay as Muslims who accept that this faith is interpreted and that it's a religion of peace, than be inclined to go to those who just say, look, these Westerners, they've so broken any pact, agreement, spoken or unspoken we have with them, we just go to war.
Nick, I think it's very important that I have some contribution in this.
Yeah.
Muslims are a very devout people. We believe that the Quran is the inimitable word of God. It is the actual speech of God, entirely preserved like no other scripture. Linguistically, that is the miracle of the Quran. There are other miracles. The commands and the prohibitions of God are timeless. We will follow them to the T, or at least aspire to follow to them, and we will repent when we don't follow them or transgress or break them. We are a civilizational faith, meaning we believe God has laws, commands and prohibitions for his slaves, his creation, for all times and all purposes. To suggest that the God that created us doesn't have laws and commands and prohibitions for us to follow to be better human beings for eternal salvation would actually be limiting the greatness and the infinite omnipotency and the divinity of God, right? So in an ideal situation, Muslims are a civilizational people. We want a unified Muslim world. Many of us do want to live under Islamic law. We want to see societies framed and positioned and influenced and shaped around our values and our morals, which are very conservative and scripturally based. At the same time, we're very cosmopolitan in terms of including those who are not from that faith tradition. That's why Jews and Christians have immense protection under Sharia law. Yes, the same Allah that tells us that do not take the Jews and Christians as allies, indeed they are allies of one another in Surah Al-Ma'idah, is the same Allah that tells us that the closeness between the Muslims is with the Christians, like my friend Sabur Ahmed told you while we were having lunch. So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that if fundamentalist means that Muslims are a civilizational people, we aspire to that, we would like that, we would like to live in a society which is molded and reflects our values in society in the Muslim world, not in the West where we are a diaspora minority, but in the Muslim world, yes, we want that. And if that makes us fundamentalist, then quite frankly, it's a label that we'll take, because Islam is fundamentalist. These are all labels that were not coined from us. Yeah. These were coined by Western establishments, by policymakers, by think tanks. These are not labels we give ourselves, right? So Muslims, the way we see it, is the truest form of following God, the Allah of Islam, is to of course worship Him, to not attribute any partners, associate any partners in worship to Him, to testify the final prophet as Prophet Muhammad, Apostle be peace, the final messenger. And that comes with obeying the laws. That comes with living in a society that's molded around that. Primarily where it has always been, not where it's never has been. So if you're talking about a fundamentalist type of Britain that wants to turn Britain into an Islamic society, no. If you're talking about Muslims who have aspirations to create a society and a civilization elsewhere that is more reflective of them, and if and when that time comes, we will happily leave. I think that's not something that's fundamentalist. I think that's a very normative position. We do not want to wipe out the white race or the non-Muslim race. We see Britons and Muslims wherever they live. You know, we were in the elevator and someone said, I've just got back from Denmark, right? And I cracked a joke. Are we ready to take over Denmark? We're not. We're not here to take over anything. We're here to just live, practice our faith, contribute in whatever best way we can. And if through engagement, action and speech, we can manage to convert, then alhamdulillah. And if not, then that's between you and your God in the hereafter. Do you think that's a fundamentalist take?
No, I don't. No, it's a perfectly reasonable take. There were, I think there will be again, people who are Muslims or claim to be Muslim, the Abu Hamza types, the Anjem Chowdhury types, and so on, who I think are fanatics. They're dangerous fanatics. They're a mirror image of Tommy Robinson.
And I do believe they were used by the British establishment to fulfill certain policies.
Now, and especially having seen what they've done with the Tommies, like Golding and so on, how they've used them to try to set up this literally civil war divide, is how they also used these Muslim crazes. And I think I perceived in talking with Muslims, especially recently, that I would say that fierce, ferocious thing has declined.
Can I ask you three things?
Yeah.
Do you believe Muslims wanting to peacefully establish a caliphate in the Muslim majority world is a problem?
No, absolutely not.
Do you believe...
I think the world would be a better place, I think as we were talking about at lunchtime.
Not an ISIS-fake caliphate.
No, I think we're moving from the period where the West dominated the world. For a mixture of reasons, we're moving towards a multipolar world. And certainly in the short term, China is going to become the great economic and military power for a while. And I think that potentially this multipolar world will be a better world. The transition from one power to another is a very dangerous time.
It always is.
Now, always is. And I think that within the multipolar world, obviously, Islam has a place, and it would surely be a better pole if it's united and without grievances and grudges where possible. So it's a confident and relaxed civilization rather than one which is feeling, we're put upon, they're all out to get us, and so on. So no, I think one of the prerequisites of peace in the world, as far as you can ever get peace in a world dominated by man, I think one of the prerequisites is a just settlement of the Islam question, and that is for Muslims to have a if not, it's for you whether you have a state or not, but certainly for the West to stop interfering.
So that's my second question.
And worse.
So that's my second question. Do you think it's an extreme or fundamentalist position to want for Muslims not to want British and military bases in our countries?
No, I think...
And not take our oil?
No.
And then put up stooges there to oppress us and sell weapons to people to then kill our own people?
I think it's an absolutely reasonable and just position.
Yeah.
That shouldn't happen. And I think that the radical thing that calls itself Islam has been deliberately weaponized by the people running the West. So Libya being a classic example. Mm-hmm. I went to Libya in 1987. It was a decent, happy country. I was free to walk around and people would talk to me as a foreigner. I've spoken to people who lived in East Germany at the time, and they said that the state was everywhere and so on. If we'd met you then, as a foreigner, we wouldn't have dared speak to you because we know we're being watched and so on. Libya was much more relaxed than that. But a radical form of Islam was weaponized by... There's no point blaming the Americans. More about MI6
when you
than
say
anybody
radical,
else.
Are you talking about when you say radical
to destroy Gaddafi?
When you say radical, because it's important because the framing of these labels is problematic for us.
Yes.
Because you know we've been called radicals for believing in the most basic normative conceptions. So are you talking about those who commit criminal acts by taking the law into their own hands and committing acts of terrorism in the name of Islam? Is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about and I understand the point about jihad being an inner struggle as well as an external struggle.
No, but it also has a military aspect.
Yes, it has a military aspect.
Absolutely.
So I'm talking about the ones who take it, this is a military struggle.
Entirely. Everyone's an enemy.
And everybody's an enemy. And we're going to kill and behead people and all the rest of it. So I'm talking about the Daesh types.
Yeah. That's a fringe, not even a fringe. That's not even fringe. It's a minority.
Surely you can understand how, especially when the Western media.
But did you use that to depict Muslims like that back then?
No. And again, now coming back to your father's point, that, you're still talking to him.
Yes.
He caused us so much trouble.
Yeah.
I spoke at, I won't say countless meetings. Most of them were fairly calm and so on. But in some places, like Bradford, like Keighley, speaking there in the early 2000s. I was going into an audience which was fighting mad against their Muslim neighbours because of the grooming issue, by criminal elements, I think, and because and scum elements, definitely.
Yeah.
By the time I was heavily involved in the British National Party, the great stream of racial violence, as I found it and experienced as white communities experience, are white lads being beaten up because they're white by lads who are a Pakistani heritage.
In the north and the Middle East.
In the north, which is where we were campaigning, where we were talking about. And the speech that...
The counter is that the counter-argument would be that Bradford, Oldham, Rochdale, Nelson, these places, these are places where our taxi drivers got attacked because of your type of politics. Where our restaurant workers got attacked and our takeaway guys got attacked and our women got attacked on the way to mosque and stuff because of the kind of rhetoric and the ideology that you're pushing. So I'm just saying that's the counter.
Yeah, I understand that's the counter, and I would say that's now I can understand when upper class lefties say this, white people saying, because they've got this utter contempt for the working class, they assume they'll do nothing unless they're manipulated by some silver-tongued outsider who comes in and cause trouble. You're people coming from a much more working class background. You should understand that's not the case. Working class communities decide things for themselves, and they've decided in Bradford in 2003 that we're basically at war with these people because of what we're doing. The police aren't interested, nothing's happening. If we go to the police, they accuse us of being racist and they arrest us and so on. And the reason that I was acquitted by the jury over the speech where I said this is a vicious, wicked faith and they're taking our girls.
That's the most famous quote attributed to you.
So I said a vicious, wicked faith and they're taking girls with the right arm because it's what it says in the Quran, right? Mm. The reason I was acquitted...
An outrageous interpretation.
Yeah, outrageous. Now, you're people seeing that on the BBC and then learning I'm acquitted.
Outrageous.
I thought this is appalling.
Yeah.
What the hell's wrong with this white jury? They obviously hate us as well. Yeah. See, the jury saw the whole speech. And the context of it is that I'm saying you've got this serious problem. And yes, I'm labelling this and say this is an Islamic thing rather than a Pakistani trash in the nighttime economy thing, which I think would be a fairer description of it. But I'm also saying, but you don't blame the whole community. Don't go and smash windows.
Did you actually say that?
Yes, I did. Why do you think they acquitted me? Mm. Because I'm saying, don't do that. Because that community isn't all to blame. Yes, we would like it if their community leaders would stand up and vigorously say this is wrong. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these people, the minute you're a criminal gang, they're tough. People don't want to go up against them.
There is no clash between the indigenous population and, for instance, settled West Indian Sikhs and Hindus. There is, however, an enormous correlation between high BNP votes and nearby Islamic populations. Yep. The reason for that is nothing to do with Islamophobia of young English girls for sex by a criminal minority of the Muslim population.
That's what I said.
Newsnight 2008.
Right, okay. So it's very rare for the media to allow me to make a statement like that, which seems reasonable. It's usually cut, so they just get the bad bit. But coming back to this speech, because it's an important thing, and why I was acquitted. So I'm saying to people that you don't blame the whole community. If you do that, all you'll do is drive their young men into the hands of the extremists. And, okay, probably, I'm sure, now, I overestimated the strength of the extremists. But they were there. Seriously, I'm sure there still are some there. There's going to be more as a result of the Gaza thing, I fear. And so the solution isn't that. It's not to go and smash windows or fight people. The real problem is the police won't act against this criminality, and the papers won't talk about it, and the council won't do anything about it. And in order to solve that problem, you've got to organise politically and get our voice into the council so we can tell the police what they must do. So I'm giving a political solution to this. And I've, as I say, only in a few meetings was it that tense, but I honestly couldn't count the number of young white lads who have just got involved in the NF and then the BNP, who were fighting mad and on the verge, if not already, using violence against their Muslim neighbours, because that was the only way they could see forward, because they're ignored, they're vilified, their community is completely disregarded, it's a shambles. And the minute they're involved in politics, so they can feel, but by giving out leaflets or knocking on doors, that they're doing something constructive, it takes the violence out of it. So I understand, especially when the media take the little snippets, that's some of the snippets of my speeches. So yeah, of course, I understand how it may genuinely be that biased snippet is actually going to cause some unfortunate taxi driver to get trouble. But the speech as a whole and political involvement, people should have learned this about Northern Ireland. If you deny a whole people basically basic rights, as the Catholics were in Northern Ireland in 1968, as black people were in Brixton in 1980, 81 and so on, as Muslims I'm sure have been or feel they are, but also as the white working class in places like Keighley have felt, if you deny them the right or even the ability to organise politically, you're going to get physical trouble, violence and hatred.
On the issue of, and these are two clarifications, I want for non-Muslims and Christians watching this and British patriots. With regards to the grooming issue, let's be unequivocally clear. These people are criminals. They are not a representation of our faith. They are not a representation of anything that is remotely Islamic. The issue the Muslims have with that type of language, the dog whistle type, is that it is attributed and associated to the faith. Hear me out. So when you read the verses of the Quran from Surah An-Nisa, where Allah tells us you're allowed 1 wife, 2 wives, 3 wives, 4 wives, and what your right hand possesses, referring to concubines and slave girls. Absolutely, there is no denying in that verse. But there is an important context. That context is that when you're living in a world where slavery and concubines are allowed and is the norm, that applies. In a society and a civilization where that does not exist, that does not apply. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Where there's a world where you can have concubines and harems and slaves and a slave trade, those rules of Islamic justice apply. We don't have that today. And the default position in Islam is to free the slave. So I need to clarify that. Number 2, with regards to the grooming gangs, these people do not represent Islam. Yes, they happen to be the rotten apples from our community. What do you then say? And we would say, then what do you say about the rotten apples from your community? Who also give vodka and crisp packets to young girls lurking, young white girls lurking around in car parks and from care homes.
I say hang them. I say hang them.
So the laws of Islam for these kind of type of criminals are far harsher and preventative than any kind of secular liberal laws in any democracy. Number 1. Number 2, the issue here is that the Muslims would counter this. We have no problems ousting and outing these criminals. What we would say is this. Let's talk about 2 factors here regarding the whole grooming situation. Number 1, and I swear by Allah, this is not victim blaming, but it's an introspective conversation that has to happen. These guys were trash criminals. they couldn't really necessarily care if it was white, brown or black. It's just that the demographic that was available was white. And the reason why, what some of the perpetrators said was that these white girls were hanging about. You know, they're hanging about. What are 12, 13, 14-year-olds hanging about? You know, why were they so easy to groom? Why were they so... And why did they find coming into cars with older guys and drinking? So basically, they were explaining that why were white girls more susceptible to being groomed? Some of them said this. Yeah. Secondly, why are we not talking about the hypersexualization of Western liberal society that makes men want to do such nefarious and sexually deviant things, and also gives a safe space and an acceptance to young girls to think that it is okay to want these things as well? So that's all Muslims are saying. We will call out our criminals. We're saying that the laws of Islam will deal with it far harsher if we lived in such a society. But it's a problem that transcends race. And according to findings of a 2020 Home Office report, concluded that such group-based child sexual exploitation offenders are most commonly white. White victims come from many backgrounds, including boys. Her name is Ella Cockbain. You heard of this lady, Ella Cockbain?
Not particularly, no.
She came and responded to Suella Braverman's arguments about the stats about Pakistani grooming gangs and so forth. So she wrote in The Guardian, she goes, while victims come from many backgrounds, and including boys, to the government's own disappointment, it found no reliable, generalizable evidence of ethnic disproportionality among such offenders. So what we're saying is, for your listeners and our listeners, groomers are evil, scum. Many of these were married with children. If the Islamic law was implemented in another part of the world, trust me, they'd be dealt with very differently. All Muslims are saying is stop trying to make out that it's a Muslim problem. Stop trying to ignore the fact that why are there young white girls in parks? Where are their parents? Do they know who their parents are? What's going on here? And number two, why are we not talking about the sexual perversion of society that makes that appealing, makes that type of deviancy appealing? That's what we're saying.
Now, everything that you've said about your community's position on so on, absolutely fine. I agree with you 100%. What you read out from some leftist scumbag working at the Home Office and so on, no.
Okay.
This is the street grooming thing is overwhelmingly from communities, from the trash element within communities which are Muslim. Now, the online sexual grooming, and especially the actual paedophilia, because I don't regard this as paedophilia, because these girls are almost all of them post-puberty. This is hebephilia, and it's wrong, and those people should hang. But most of the online grooming gangs and the gangs operating through social services, this sort of thing, they're white. They're white scum, and they should be executed.
Are you saying that there's complacency from those elements within the institutions?
Of course there's complacency. Of course there's complacency. Not least because these are white working class kids. They don't give a damn. If it was happening to the middle class kids, there'd have been a lot more trouble a lot earlier. But they don't give a damn.
But white working class kids are the demographic majority. White working class people are the demographic majority.
Yes, but it's because they're white working class that the British upper class, overwhelmingly white, doesn't give a damn.
But these are your countrymen.
Yeah, of course.
But these are your countrymen.
And I do give a damn, but I also recognise that if this was done to any healthy community, the people doing it would have been, if not killed, they'd have had the 7 bells of shit kicked out of them. It would have stopped very early on. And according to the Labour MP, Sarah Campion, 1 million girls raped. Actually, it does include the Hindus, the West Indians, to a lesser degree the Sikhs. They also say this has happened to us as well, but most of them white English. Now, why the hell are the fathers, the brothers, the uncles? Because if the state, first of all, you have a responsibility in a supposedly civilised society to go to the state forces.
So do you reject the 2020 findings of the government?
Yes, broadly, yeah. It's just another whitewash cover-up,
so
which will only make white working class people who feel that they're victims of this think the whole thing is a cover-up. And
but it's based on data.
So we don't blame.
Are you rejecting the data?
It's based on what Home Office leftists want to find. You can prove anything with data. So yeah, I do reject it. And
it's
certainly
a Tory government.
It's
a Tory government.
And so it's a Tory. It may be a Tory government which is fundamentally liberal. It's not conservative in any way, shape, or form.
This is your ideological issue with your brethren,
except in name. And certainly the people running the civil service are not remotely conservative. It's dominated by hardcore leftists who have an intense class-based contempt for the white working class and a hatred of everything British as well. So, and trying to pretend and tell white people in somewhere like Bradford, it's not happening, don't worry. That's not going to do any good at all.
No, they're saying it's happening. They're saying there's not disproportionality. There's not disproportionality.
Yeah,
that's what they're saying. That's what they found.
The perception is that it is. So it's your interview, but if I can ask you one question. So you said, this is the Muslim position, and I accept that.
Yeah.
So in places where this has been going on, and your community must know it's going on.
Some places, yeah.
So have imams preached and said, big style, look, this is wrong?
Absolutely.
They have.
Absolutely.
Right. Yes.
Shall I tell you something? I'm against imams having to do that. Shall I tell you why? Because when you start doing that, when faith leaders start addressing their community by saying, don't groom, don't do these things, it appears to us that this problem is linked to our religion. Why are imams and sheikhs and alims and basically religious leaders, men of sacred knowledge, why are they telling their community and their menfolk not to do this? Because the veneer and the feeling and what that shows is that then it's a problem that's inherent in your communities to do with the faith. Now, that said, due to the pressures and the expectations of the host people, the host indigenous people, our fellow white Britons, loads of imams shouted it from the pulpits. I believe that they shouldn't have, because I believe that as soon as imams start doing that, you've accepted the argument that this is something linked to our faith, but we don't believe it is at all. Because when these guys do what they do, they're just sexual perverts.
Yes. Yeah.
They are trash.
Yes.
So if they were citing verses of the Quran of Surah An-Nisa, if they were saying, the Prophet married Aisha at 6 and consummated at 9 and these kind of things, then I can understand why it has to be addressed from the pulpits. Yes. But they weren't, Nick.
So from my position, it would, in an ideal world, your community leaders and the politicians there, not the imams, they should have said, look, this is going to stop. They should stop because, not least, one, it's wrong, but two, it's going to bring all sorts of trouble down on our community as a whole, and they should have stopped it by physical violence. But I can't blame your people for not doing so, because none of the fathers and brothers...
A lot of these guys got battered.
From my community.
A lot of these guys, when they got found out, some of these guys that got found out, before they got arrested, they got their heads kicked in locally. But they...
Good.
They did. And if they were let out back to the community, they'd get smashed. But obviously, the law doesn't even allow that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. But it's unfortunate that it shouldn't have come to your community, because people from my community, the fathers, should have dealt with it first. But you're dealing with a population, a demographic, who've had their culture, their identity, their faith ripped out by the roots.
Let's wrap up on this Islam.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read out a few more quotes. I don't want individual responses, but I just want to wrap up. BNP conference 2009, apparently you said 100,000 Muslims that are disloyal to Britain to be replaced by the Gurkhas. Channel 4 2009, there is no place for Islam in Europe. Islam is cancer. BBC 2009, I didn't say anyone should be murdered at sea. I say boats should be sunk. They can throw them a life raft and they can go back to Libya. Nikki Campbell, Radio 5 2010, I am not anti-Muslim, I'm anti-Islam. I'm just going to ask you this final question, Nick, before we can move on. But I have to ask you this. Do you have any regrets over these statements?
Do I have any regrets over those statements?
Do you still stand by some of these statements, all of these statements?
No, I don't. I suppose if I'd been more circumspect, kinder, fairer, it would have been better. No, I'm not going to... There's no point me apologising for something I said. There's things there, and especially...
Would you apologise to those where those statements had an actual real-life impact on people?
If they did, yes. Yep. But most of the problems in a multicultural Britain come as a result of we've got people in power who don't actually give a damn about your people or my people. They're interested in power and money and doing what they have to get on. We can have a blame game. Well, your community didn't do enough, or I said this and all the rest of it. It doesn't really help us go forward.
I'm talking about those statements.
Yes, yeah, those statements. Yeah, they're pretty harsh. I mean, like the Libyan one, that's not directed against Muslims.
The vast majority of refugees coming from there are Muslims.
I'm speaking there. Once Gaddafi had gone, it's a channel whereby people from all over Africa come through. And it's not a question about whether they're Muslims or
The
not.
vast majority of them are
And
Muslim.
those people, again, the context to that, I'm saying, look, and I spoke in Parliament about this. I say, you can have two ways of dealing with this. You can be tough and make it clear that none get through, or you can let them come through, and as a result, thousands will die en route, as they do. Whereas if you sink a boat near to the Libyan shore, so you make it absolutely clear you're not one of you's coming through. Sink a boat and give them life jackets. I'm saying you're not going to kill anybody, but it's tough. And I said to the Liberals, exactly in the context of that, that if you have your way, thousands will die because they'll try and get across, and most will get through, and most will be drowned. So that's not a harsh, unfeeling thing. It's a simple way. And I know that white people looking at this would think, well, wait a minute. Here's Pakistan in the last few weeks has reportedly decided to expel, 1.7 Afghan refugees.
Disgusting.
But we're not allowed to do that.
No, but what Pakistan's doing from an Islamic standpoint is very bad.
But do you not understand why they're doing it?
Yeah, but I think that's also a problem to do with nationalism. I believe that the nation state, the secular nation state, its frameworks, its motions, its cogs and wheels creates this mindset. This is my position, that one of the problems with what we say in Arabic, asabiya, or tribalism, of which nationalism, modern nationalism is an aspect of it, that it creates this mindset. It's less compassionate. But you would probably argue that too much compassion results in the multiculturalist shithole that you think that we have, yeah? Are you still of that position?
Yeah.
Before we move on to I guess, one of the reasons why we are having this conversation, I want to ask you squarely, do you hate Islam?
No.
Do you hate Muslims?
No.
Do you hate South Asians?
No.
Do you wish for us to leave this country?
If it was possible by agreement, yes.
Would you pay us to leave?
Yes.
Yeah.
But here we're exactly where I was years ago. What I would say, if you remember earlier on in this discussion, I said there's 20 years in which to turn this around. And after that, there's no way. So we're in that position now. So we had to be realistic. And it's always people, especially on the extremes of politics or religion, they confuse what they'd like with what is possible. It's a very, very dangerous thing. So I'm now saying, I'm getting lots of stick in the white nationalist and racist community and so on, when I'm saying, look, you can't reverse this. And they're just saying, oh, we just cut off the benefits, and we say they're going, and they'll go, look, Pakistan is kicking out 1.7 million, we could do the same. Of course we couldn't. It's absolutely impossible for all sorts of reasons. It would be a civil war which nobody would win.
Also, Britain's Ireland and Pakistan and Afghanistan are both Muslim nations that border each other.
There's all sorts of reasons, but it can't be done, so it's childish, it's tooth fairy politics to pretend this can be done. So my position hasn't changed, it's just the time's run out. So I now believe that we've got this multicultural society, which has a tendency to be fundamentally unstable, especially when there's ideologically and financially directed extremists, which are present are mainly on my ethnic side of the fence, the Tommy Robinsons and so on, who are being
and the Douglas Murrays.
Paid and facilitated to tear this society apart and plunge us into civil war. Now, I think it's quite likely they won't succeed.
Why?
Because in the end, to have a civil war, you've got to have two sides that really want to fight. And most people don't really want to fight. But they're trying to.
Muslims don't want to fight.
But if...
Muslims don't want to fight.
But if Tommy Robinson had got his way, when in about 2000 and...
But they get smashed every time they go to these areas.
In about 2016, 17, when Tommy Robinson and a little group had a meeting with my friend and colleague Jim Dowson, I believe you've spoken to, and they said, right, we've got this, and Jim is a genius on PR and exploiting social media.
This is Jim who founded Britain First, right?
Yes, he founded Britain First and he left it. We'll perhaps come on to that in a bit, actually, or you can perhaps ask him. Perhaps I think he'd make a very interesting guest for you. But they were saying at this meeting, right, we want you on side because we're going to get pictures of the Prophet, obscene cartoons. So depicting is bad enough, but then in obscene cartoons, and we're going to get gangs of young blokes to go into Muslim areas and have demonstrations and all. And Jim said, "So you want a civil war?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "Well, have you actually prepared for this? So that when you get white working class communities, when there is a civil war, have you got any way of helping them fight it?" "Oh no, we're not interested. All we want is the war." Now, there's people out there, and the whole cenotaph, the Muslims are going to desecrate the poppies. Outrage. Poisonous nonsense. But they know they're touching a really sensitive button with the Brits. Just as someone accidentally tears a page of a Quran, and it's for you people. Yeah. Touch the poppy for us. It's one of the few sacred things.
But the PR disaster was a blowback.
So actually, it was a blowback. But they meant it to start a civil war, not just to cause a bit of trouble, not just to get Suella Braverman to become prime minister. That's a side issue. Yeah. They're trying to create a civil war, and if they get it, there'll be 30 years of horror. And initially, the whites will lose massively, because your people, the criminal elements, they're heavily armed. Ours aren't. You're organised. You've got a network of community organisations and mosques. If push comes to shove, your people are equipped to fight a civil war. Mine aren't. So we get the shit kicked out of us for the first X million dead. Once you turn off, which it would happen, you turn off the default position of the Western mind is psychotic violence, organised military industrial violence. That's our default position for hundreds of years.
That's a horrible position.
It's a horrible position, but it's the default position. It's been switched off to an ethno-masochistic, cowardly, pathetic, completely the other way, liberal thing. And if this kind of trouble flick the switch back, then, because first of all the Ulster loyalists are away with the fairies on the Gaza issue, and then the Zionist lobby, they pour weapons and training in, and no side would win. You'd have 30 years of horror, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, dead, and at the end of that, by then older Tommy Robinsons and the older whoever will be the hardcore extremists that come on your side and shoot you as well as me, at the end of it, they'll sit down, because either the Americans or the Chinese or someone will say, look, this is getting in the way of trade. We need to settle this down now.
Sounds all very sinister and scary. Do you honestly think they could lead that way?
This is what could happen. I'm not saying it will. This is what could happen. At the end of the 30 years of horror, the bastards who helped to cause it will settle down just like in Northern Ireland, and they'll sit at these big fancy dinners, and they'll take the money from the foundations, and they'll sit in Parliament together with some sort of peace agreement. And seeing that as a possibility, I'd far rather be sitting here talking with you and you addressing my people who are watching this. They're thinking, I didn't know any of that, what he's saying about how they they beat up groomers. Wow.
We did.
Didn't know that. And hopefully your people might be seeing, well, some of what I'm saying, especially when we talk about Gaza, it's sensible. So we don't have to take, these people aren't all out to get us. So perhaps we can short circuit the process and build a multicultural society which does work. And one last thing on that. What we're sold by the left of the BBC and so on as a multicultural society where all of us agree that LGBTQ plus is fine and everybody marries across their boundaries and all the communities just merge. So we become a raceless, rootless, faithless, coffee-coloured population who consume Coca-Cola or McDonald's. That's my ultimate nightmare. I'd actually rather have a civil war between us and you. So we have boundaries and so on. And there's your community and my community. But neither of those is anything like decent when there's at least a hope, because in the end most people are decent, and self-interest alone dictates you don't really want to be involved in a civil war. 18-year-olds want to be involved in a war. 22-year-olds often do. I've got 10 grandsons, so 9 grandsons and a granddaughter. I don't want a civil war, because some of those boys will die in it, the same as your kids will. So if we can head this off at the pass and addressing issues, which is why I'm very glad we addressed the grooming issue. More difficult for your community than my community. Yeah, difficult for my community to understand and accept what you're saying, but still we discussed that. And also there's in the big picture, because Muslims don't think in a nationalist and a tribal way. I'm a tribalist. Yeah, I'm a nationalist.
We're not.
But you're not.
We're pan-Islamic.
Yeah, so I understand that.
We're pan-Islamic.
But most white people thinking, well, why are these Pakistanis in Britain and so on, why are they getting so upset about what's happening half a world away in Israel? It's really nothing to do with us. It's nothing to do with them. I understand that it is.
Because there are Muslim brothers and sisters.
Yeah, and how the Western power elite is treating, it's not just the Gazans. The Gazans, it's not the first stage, it's the latest stage of a planned ethnic cleansing. They talk about from one river to from the river to somewhere else. I better not say it in case it gets you knocked off.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
That is nothing like as extreme as from the Brook of Egypt, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Everything must be a Jewish state, a Zionist state. And this isn't the crackpots, this is Netanyahu and his coalition partners. So this is the expulsion of every Palestinian Christian as well as Muslim. Obviously, most now
Remove all
Muslim,
Gentiles,
but also the removal of everybody across a vast swathe of the Middle East, most of whom will become very angry refugees here. Because most Arab countries have got more sense than to take them.
So onto that,
it's absolute madness, and I want to try to avoid that, or at least let your people understand that there's some people on the white British side who get it.
During your time, before we get into the Israel Gaza, and we kind of bring it close to the podcast with that subject, what was the conversation like during your times in the BNP, and just generally your overall experience about the undeniable link between Western-led wars, which Britain has participated in at the behest of America, Iraq, Afghanistan primarily, but not exclusively, and the link between Western military interference in the Muslim world and the refugee crisis. We met my friend Obeida up here, who's an Iraqi. The Iraqi refugee crisis started after the Iraq war. There was no WMDs, there was no Al-Qaeda being harbored. Obama even apologized by saying that we caused the birth of ISIS. We created that vacuum that gave birth to the ISIS.
And he armed them.
Yeah, absolutely. Afghanistan, hey, look, you've handed it back. You've handed it back to the Taliban, and there wasn't a single Afghan on that plane going into 9/11. And that's created the refugee crisis. During your experience in your political career, don't people on the right understand the link between Western-led wars and the refugee migrant crisis?
Absolutely, absolutely. I spoke...
You bomb people there, they will come here.
For well more than a decade, for nearly 20 years, I spoke perhaps 3 or 4 meetings every single week to primarily working class communities, mainly men, the length and breadth of Britain. And I usually spoke, sometimes I'd say, right, I'm not coming with a speech. You ask the questions, because if I'm here with a speech, it's just what I intend to say to try and manipulate you. You just ask the questions. Don't tell me what you want to hear. Just ask the question and then see at the end of it, do we actually agree? And the level of sophistication, and we have long, serious political discussions with people who, you know, to the likes of the posh people on BBC. These are almost subhumans. These are the knuckle draggers, you know, the morons. And they're not serious political discussions. And among the things that I would say there was, we're not blaming them. One of the reasons they're here is that...
We're bombing them there.
Is that we're bombing them there. So you're here partly because my father was in India in 1946.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. And it goes back further and further beyond that.
Yes.
But currently... You're here because it's not just a Muslim thing. I don't know if Chad is even a Muslim country.
Chad is a Muslim country.
Chad is.
Chad is a
but
Muslim country.
France hasn't been looting Chad of uranium and poisoning the place because of Islamophobia. It's money. Money. And so if you, in a vaguely normal world, if a country discovers oil or discovers uranium, it should make its people richer and happier and they can do things and have schools and hospitals. It's the kiss of death to any poor third world country to discover something like that, because in come the vultures and they loot and strip, and even if they let you develop it, it's with borrowed money, you pay back at interest. So it's a disaster. So I've always been... Now, John Tyndall, my predecessor in the BNP, he was a British imperialist. He was a little flag-waving man. I've never been a British imperialist. Yes, we had, you know, the colours of the Union Jack running through the BNP lettering and so on, because you can't appeal to a British people who still have a sense, we're British, that's our flag and so on. You can't come out with ideological perfection and start saying we're going to invent our completely new flag because nearly everything our country has done abroad in the last 200 years has been wrong. You can't do that. So I've used the flag, but I've never been a British imperialist, and I'm absolutely convinced that before you could begin to have a sort of peace treaty between the two great religious powers of the world, Christianity and Islam, before you can begin to have a peace treaty whereby perhaps some of you, your community, voluntarily will think, well, look, it's better there than it is here. It's not just the weather, you know, the whole thing, the demographics of Pakistan. It's a lively young country. It's now growing. There's peace and, you know, and all the rest of it. So some people would go home, which makes it easier to keep the balance of population so the society remains stable. Because if one group is spreading more than is growing far more than the others, then you get problems.
3 things, Nick. It's very important, it's related. If Muslims here in the UK and all the Western countries that they're in, 3rd, 4th generation, if they saw no meddling in their countries of origin, their motherlands, if they saw that there could be political autonomous change without the interference of the CIA and dark powers and entities who want to enslave our countries through the IMF and World Banks and these kind of things, if it was viable for us to resettle, trust me, we'd move. Right? If there was a future caliphate which was more reflective of our society and our morals and our religion and our morals and stuff, we would go there. The point of the matter is, we can't.
It's not, of course not.
Iran is not an example.
Yes.
Saudi is not an example. Even the new Taliban Emirate is not an example. These are not, because we need military bases, Americans and Brits, to leave. Leave. Because whilst you're there, it will always feel like a colonial outpost.
I agree, absolutely. And it's not just military, it's also the whole economic system and so on. And this has to be put right, because otherwise we're constantly at loggerheads, and that somewhere or other is going to cause trouble and horror. And at present, it's mainly causing horror in your lands.
Yes.
It's got the potential to cause horror in Europe. Now, to be brutally honest, I'm more concerned about horror in my land than a land far, far away.
Understandably.
But it's wrong there anyway. It's a matter of principle, especially, and it's not. You can say glibly, it's not our war. We should keep you out of it.
Do you understand why Muslims care so much?
But it is, of course, it do. Yes.
Do you understand why
course.
Afghanistan, Iraq, the Rohingya, the Palestinians?
The whole of your identity is about the faith,
the Ummah,
rather than a geographic thing. Of course, I understand that.
Do you find that extreme?
No, I understand. Obviously, it's different, but I understand exactly where it comes from. And
Christianity did have it once.
Christianity had it once, indeed so, and post-Reformation in particular hasn't. And there are good and bad, So there's plenty of hardcore white racists who say, we shouldn't have these independent. Mosley was one. You shouldn't have these independent states. It leads to war. Let's have a united Europe. The whole point of that was a united white Christian Europe. That was the thing. So there's this. I understand exactly where you people are coming from. You couldn't do that with Europe, with Christendom, because we're so far moved from the old Christendom, it's simply not there. It's wholly unrealistic. So you get a European Union, which is actually a socialist, atheist monstrosity, even worse than the nation states. But obviously you can have that. As I say, if we can have a peace deal, but it has to be a just peace deal. It can't be enforced at gunpoint, let alone with thermonuclear bombs or whatever. It has to be a just peace deal, and it would suit your people in Islam, and it would suit our people as well.
Inshallah.
But it's a long way.
It's a long way. Yeah, no. Look. I pray to God that there comes a time where, look. Even these terms many will find problematic, but Christian Europe, Christian West, whatever you want to call it, and that if there is a reflective, representational Islamic civilization, whether it be in the form of a caliphate or sultanate or a union of actual independent Muslim states, right? That I hope that a peace treaty or an agreement of that nature would be far more beneficial to mankind, considering we make up most of mankind, right? Whether that be by identity or association. I hope I believe that would be a better prospect than what we're having right now. To bring the podcast to a close, let's talk about Israel, the Zionist lobby, and the ongoing war on Gaza. Are you supporting the Palestinians, or are you criticizing the Zionists because there's an inherent dislike for Jews?
I'm supporting the Palestinians, and I'm criticizing the Zionists, and I'm also pointing out that Zionism doesn't grow out of nothing. It's the political expression of a ruthlessly, genocidally xenophobia and racism, which exists within Judaism, particularly in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud. And as I said before, there's Jews who don't go along with this. There's leftist Jews, there's the Nasira Carter types and so on, and there's secular people.
Yes, I oppose this unequivocally.
So that they oppose it too.
Why is it a European issue and not an Islamic issue? Let me explain to you why. Why is it the case that... I think one of the reasons is the way Islam very quickly nipped in the bud the issue of usury. That's what I believe.
Could
right?
be, yep.
Because it's very well known and documented that the Jews of Medina, the first Islamic society, they used to practice usury. And this was something that was banned in the Islamic markets throughout Islamic civilization for over a millennia. The issue, what you've just described, it seems to be a European issue with Jews, not an Islamic issue with Jews. Because the Islamic issue with Jews is that they lived, they thrived, they flourished they didn't necessarily embed themselves within the machinations of Islamic civilization. But in Europe, that was not the case.
Yeah. So why is that? Right? Well, I don't know why it is, but the Berber armies, Muslim armies, didn't force the gates of Toledo. They were opened.
As liberators?
No, they were opened by Jews as a negotiation, and then the Jews became, the money lenders and so on for within that system. Constantinople gate, there was a subversive fifth column within it, which helped the Muslims take Constantinople.
That's crazy.
Against the Jews. No, honestly.
Come on,
and you see the gates of modern Western civilization have been opened on account of the same fundamentalist hatred. All religions have religious crazes. The Christians, the Christians have got the Christian Zionist crazes. The Muslims have got the crazy crazies who aren't representative.
Quickly,
and the Jews also have a crazy hatred of Christians.
Do you believe? Are you telling me that? I just need to make this very clear, because the Constantinople, 1453, many believe that to be a prophecy. The Prophet Muhammad said that Constantinople will fall and its army will be great and its leader will be great. Sultan Muhammad Fatih, may Allah have mercy on him. Are you saying, if I've understood you correctly, that in those key historical moments where the Muslims entered European lands, whether it be Andalus, Spain, Constantinople, you're saying there was Jewish involvement in that?
Yes. There always has been.
I'm telling you now, most people think that's bonkers.
Most people, and now the bulk of it was the fact that these Muslim armies were superior to the Christian opponents.
Yes.
For one reason or another. But it's not helped by the fact that there's people opening the gates. Just as, if you look at in
Andalus, they saw us as liberators. In Andalus, we were being oppressed by the Catholics, we were being oppressed by the Christians. The Muslims will give us our rights.
What, the Jews? Yeah. Yes, undoubtedly. I do understand to a degree where the Jews are coming from in this, but I'm not a Jew. If I was a Jew, then I don't know whether I'd be an Israel Shamir, Ron Unz type of Jew, an Atura Carter, or whether I'd be a crazy Zionist. I don't actually know. I hope I'd take the right side, but I'm a tribalist, so I don't know. All I'm saying is that, as you say, they were oppressed, or they felt oppressed by the Christians, so they welcomed
the Muslims.
They opened the Muslims in as liberators, which might be fine for them.
But it wasn't good for
But it's not good for the Christians. It's not good for the people who I identify with. Yeah. Now, what I will say here, to try to be fair and to put this into context, that in Christian Europe, the Jews were kicked out of everywhere, primarily because the elite of the time used them as money lenders, because if it comes too hot, you simply blame the Jews and you have the peasants go and kill them.
Acknowledge that is the case.
I recognise that there's an issue, and I wonder if there's an extent, and again, you've got all the Muslims at the present completely focused on the Zionist issue. And when we were talking earlier on about who really runs, the money power of the United States. So there's an element of disproportionate involvement of Jews, but there's plenty of, for want of a better word, WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon, originally Protestants, right? And whether they're now Satanists or Protestants doesn't really matter. There's plenty of them, and the World Economic Forum thing. So, Klaus Schwab, I think he's a German. The horrible little creature they have as their main spokesman, the transhumanist, we're going to remake humanity, we're going to make man, we're going to make the new Superman, completely against God, and so on. So he's Jewish, but I think most of them aren't. This is super capitalism. It transcends all religious boundaries, other than possibly a dark Satanism. And I think perhaps it's very convenient for them that if people are going to kick up against anything, they focus on the Jews, whether it's on account of Talmudism or on account of the Zionist thing. Because I think in the end, if you've got the great Satan is in the United States, the great Satan isn't even Netanyahu and his people. That's the little Satan. And I'm not absolutely sure of that, but I think it may be the case. So just as the medieval kings would set the Jews up to collect the money and be patsies, I think we might have an element of that going on now from just the money power, which knows no faith, no boundaries, no identity.
So this goes back to a question I asked earlier on in the podcast. Do you think that relationship will ever sever or be affected? Because if you're now saying or suggesting that, and again, correct me if I've misunderstood, that there is this relationship that Christian Europe and the West has had when it comes to wars, financing wars, lending money and so on. When it all goes pear-shaped or sideways, you can just conveniently blame the Jews, exile them until the next war, right? If you're saying that the equivalent of that today is the Zionist lobby and the Zionist financiers, will that relationship ever sever or become impacted? Because what I'm seeing is the Christian Protestant right, who from an identity point of view have always been pro-Israel. I spoke to Jim about this. The Protestant, they're pro-Israel.
Yes, of course. Yep.
They're Zionists. But this time around, I'm seeing a bit more of a dissent.
Yeah.
I'm seeing more a shift in how we're seeing how this alliance is so synonymous. They're seeing that it's actually detrimental to the interest and the autonomy of our respective countries. Why has that shift happened?
I think I sense it as well. I get it as well. It definitely is going on.
You're a manifestation of that.
Yeah, perhaps. Yes. Yeah, perhaps so.
Jada Fanson is a manifestation of that.
So perhaps it. So it is going on, and why? Partly because Christian Zionism is not. That's not the original position of Christendom. Not at all. We're imperialists and all the rest of it. That's one thing. But the Christian Zionist thing is a late 19th century heresy, which was pushed through in the United States by some clever selling of the Schofield Bible, which is a completely heretical piece of nonsense.
Which in short says the Gentiles have to get the Holy Land ready for the coming of...
Which is that the Gentiles have to get ready, that unless you must... Israel is Israel. It's not. Israel is the Church of Christ. Because the Jews broke the covenant, that's it. It's finished. Christ himself said that's finished. But coming back to the whole Christian Zionist thing, it's a very recent thing within... It's very rare in Britain, other than in Northern Ireland. It's very, very recent, even in America. It's not organic, it's not natural. And I think that so many Americans have had their eyes opened by the way in which the Democrats, the left and so on, operate against the United States, by the way in which the whole liberal elite is so that they are a very Christian and conservative people. So the LGBTQ thing offends and worries them just as much as it does you and me.
I have to ask you something.
And your people. So they, because they're looking now, and most of all recently, it may not bother your people perhaps, but the whole COVID thing and how this fake pandemic, as we see it, was imposed for reasons of money and power. And so many people...
You don't think COVID was real?
Oh, of course COVID was real. It was a rebranding of the flu. Yes, it killed elderly people, and in particular it killed hideously obese Brits and Americans. Yeah, who were on the point of death.
Do you think the numbers are fake?
No, I think it's entirely true. It didn't kill any more than flu in a bad year. Kills tens of thousands of people in Britain.
Did you get vaccinated?
I did, under protest with the Oxford, because it's the least harmful, because I'm past reproductive age. I don't really give a damn, and I wanted to be able to travel. But I told everyone who would listen, don't get vaccinated. It's not necessary, and it's probably poisonous. And I think the Pfizer one almost certainly was, or at least it's rushed out. It hasn't been tested. It's dangerous, but it's not that. I'm not talking about the disease and that response. I'm talking about the way in which lockdown was imposed, and it's a test lockdown for an elite which wants to lock down. They want to keep the whole third world at third world level, the old third world, and they want to depress our living standards to the same.
Whilst they party in Downing Street.
While they party and they're absolutely fine. And they're determined, they're quite open, the World Economic Forum types, they're quite open about this. They intend to destroy our productive and our food productive and our energy capacity to the point where we're pushed down so far into material poverty that we're no longer this threat because of this mythical climate God thing that they've got. But regardless of how people think about that, I think that there's so many on the American right got that. Actually, even if it was wrong, they believe it. That's what counts in this case. And they understood the media were lying to them on a massive scale. So they're now prepared to question. In fact, their default position is now they question everything. Before the COVID thing, the default position of the masses in Britain and in the United States was believe everything. Now the default position is disbelieve and go and do a bit of research. And despite extensive censorship on the internet, I'm banned from Facebook for life by Zuckerberg himself. You put this on YouTube and there's a risk. I'm in effect banned from YouTube, and I'm not the only one. So, but despite that sort of censorship, people in Middle America have now got it enough that they've gone to do their own research, and you don't have to do very much research at all. to find out that CNN, Sky and all the rest of them, they're lying about what happened on October the 7th. They're lying about the origins of this conflict. They're lying about the good Jews versus the evil Muslims. They're lying, so therefore they see. So I think that's it. And the leaders, perhaps, as far as any leaders are speaking out about this now, it's partly because they're pushed from the people below. They're pushed by the mass of people who in the end provide their money.
Do you believe the Palestinians have been wronged?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that's occupied land?
Of course, yes. They were wronged from the Balfour Declaration onwards. So they were wronged specifically by the British elite.
So can you now understand the frustration and the antagonism and the distrust that Muslims have towards the British establishment when they show unequivocal support for its genocidal war?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm terrified by where it's potentially going to lead us. So, yeah, absolutely understand it.
My last question to you, and this is more as a Muslim to a Christian. You mentioned the LGBT issue. I think you've been quite unequivocal and quite clear with regards to your position on Zionism, its historical roots, according to yourself, in terms of the relationship between Christian Europe and Jews and that relationship there. I want to ask you something, Nick, and I want this to be the concluding aspect of our podcast, because, you know, Allah tells us in the Quran, and verbatim verse will be there on the screen, you know, come, and let's find a common word between us, that we worship none other than God and worship Him alone. So there's an actual instruction there to the Muslims to engage with Christians, not as permanent allies, but those who in values and morals at least are closer to us than theologically the Jews. You know, when you talk about LGBT, when we spoke about the grooming issue, about why young white girls were out and about at certain times of the day, where were their fathers, where were their parents? When we spoke earlier on about soaring divorce rates, when we spoke about the number of single parents in the UK, Britain leading Europe in most cases in this regard. When we speak about all of this, and I'll ask you as a Muslim to a Christian, do you not believe that the decline of the institution of marriage in the UK and broadly speaking the Western Hemisphere, the decline of having children within the family institution, just general social and moral decadence in terms of a hedonistic life, you know, no awareness or regard for God or anything sacred, you know, a lot of this stuff could be prevented if Christians remained true to their principles and remain true to the principles and the values of the Bible. And I'm saying this as a Muslim who believes that the Bible is a tampered revelation, that we believe that when it was revealed, it was the truth and the word of God. And there could be remnants of it, which is still the truth, but we can never conclusively say. What's your thoughts on the decline of Christianity in the West and how that has contributed towards what you're seeing?
Well, I could just answer that with yes.
No,
so I agree with everything you said.
But why?
To elaborate on that, I think all religions go through sort of ups and downs phases in terms of how committed people are and how much enthuses them. Whether Christianity is more so than Islam, I don't know. But certainly, I'm a keen genealogist, family history and so on. If you go back to the 18th century, 1/3 of all the marriages in rural England, the woman's already pregnant. She has the child within 9 months of being married. All the churches that you look around today are the ones that are now falling into ruin, becoming mosques because they're empty as no one else goes.
Are we to blame for that?
No, absolutely not.
Are Muslims to blame for why churches are empty?
Definitely not. No, they're empty because people have lost God. Or demographic, they simply aren't there anymore. So it's a combination. But those churches were also empty and derelict in the 1840s and 1850s. Because at that point also, the British in general, the English in particular, had lost their faith in a huge way.
The Enlightenment could be blamed for that.
So and nothing is perhaps it's the Enlightenment, but it comes and goes in waves. And typically, European countries, and I think it's most places, most religions probably, people go back, or they get the faith when they're subjected to some particular external pressures. And things are going wrong and so on, whether it's violence or poverty or the change of the Industrial Revolution, and whole communities, bang, almost overnight, you go back and they become religious and they become better places. for that, regardless generally of the religion. They become better anyway.
What is the golden era of European civilization,
sorry?
do you think? What do you regard as the golden era of European civilization? When was the last golden era? Do you believe we're living in the golden era now?
No, absolutely not.
When was the last golden era?
I think
for Christian Europe.
From a Christian,
yeah.
Then you've actually got to go back to late Victorian times, just before the First World War.
Okay.
When, for all the hypocrisies and the injustices and so on, it was a better country. My mother, so it's past that. My mother, she was evacuated as a child during the Blitz.
Victorian women look like our women.
Yeah, indeed so. But my mother said that when she was young, even when I was young, kids were free in Barnet. Was free at the age of below 8. Boys and girls, we could wander anywhere we wanted, and our parents all told us the same thing: don't talk to tramps, who were poor old chaps actually, head screwed from the Second World War and the Korean War mainly. But other than that, we were completely free. So that was almost a golden era, because it was in the afterglow of this confident and decent Christian-based society. So that's now gone. But coming back to what I was saying about the churches in Victorian times, they were derelict because that was one of our non-religious phases. And under the pressure that I think is coming with a combination of issues, a convergence of catastrophes is heading the West way. So you've got the whole demographic shambles, which isn't about your numbers anything like as much as it's about our numbers, up, down. And the LGBT and the kids with no fathers, all this is heading for a catastrophic civilizational disaster, on top of all of which we've got an elite which is now hell-bent on destroying the fundamental material basis of our civilization, particularly an effective energy system. So there's going to be all sorts of trouble. The result of that trouble, I believe, is you'll wake up one morning and find, wow, these Brits have found God. Some of them will find Islam, actually.
They're already finding Islam.
Some of them are. But there'll come a flip point, and most of them will find, actually, I believe, the faith of their fathers. And it won't be automatically hostile to you people. It'll be far better.
Can I ask you something?
And I think that is.
Does it surprise you that Islam is the fastest growing religion in Britain? Does that surprise you? That Islam is the fastest growing religion in Britain?
No. I think that certainly.
Or that the highest number of converts in Europe happen to be white women.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Why?
It's.
Are we to blame for that?
No.
Are we to blame?
Women innately want something that's strong and settled and secure, and the man is the boss.
Yes.
That is what even the feminists. That's what they really want deep down. So Islam offers
hypergamy.
Islam offers this. Yeah, sure. But
Christianity should offer this.
Yeah, Christianity should. So there's a smallish town near where I live called Newtown, where it's almost exclusively white Welsh, and the kids used to be all just sort of couldn't give a damn, just youngsters just doing things they do, which is drink and drugs and all the rest of it. And it's now split three ways. There's a fresh population who are doing smack and all the rest of it. Cannabis just absolutely wrecked. They're going to leave no kids, effectively. Few single mums, and they're going to disappear. There's about 1/3 who are still doing what normal Western teenagers do in the more decent way. Still, godless and hedonistic, but not out of your head, crazy, self-destructive. And fully 1/3 of them go to a big evangelical Christian church, and no one in, although there's a few Muslims there, no one in Newtown's been converted to that. Lots of kids, they go out on a Saturday night, the slightly older ones, with sandals. And there's young girls tottering around drunk on high heels and so on. They give them sandals and they help them home, or they pay for a proper taxi to get them home.
That's really good of them.
So this is also happening in our community as well as yours. And I think that the most likely thing, and certainly I want, as a tribalist and a Christian, I want them to come back to Christianity. And I think they probably will. And it would be a far, far better place. And where we are at present is a civilizational disaster in its later stages. It's horrible to see. It's dangerous to all concerned, but it will turn around. Mm-hmm. I hope it can turn around purely because they look into this abyss, this godless abyss, and don't like what they see, and they come out of it themselves under the pressures of external financial, economic pressures, all the rest of it. I hope they come to it that way, rather than they're driven back to God through violence. And just one more thing on this. Having, in the BNP days, I was culturally a Christian, but really not much more than that. There was no votes in pretending to be
You're
Christian.
a reformed Christian now.
So I'm now a Christian, but as I say, I'm more of a Christian now much more than I was then. Then it was more or less cultural as opposed to a faith and believing that this is really a good thing innately in itself. But obviously prophecies are very important to Muslims and so on. But there's also in the Old Testament, constantly, when his people, which was the Jews, now it's us, have gone astray, they're no longer obedient, God chastises them, the chastising rod, and the chastising rod constantly is the sons of Ishmael, the Arabs, by extension, the Muslims. So it's entirely possible. So I'm not going to hate you or Islam, especially more so now, than perhaps it's part of God's plan to drive this heathen, godless, effed up, white, ex-Christian population back to faith, back to our faith. You may just be the chastening rod. And if so, you're part of prophecy, part of God's plan, and fair play to you.
Nick, I thoroughly enjoyed having you on.
I've enjoyed being here, thank you.
Depending on where this podcast goes out, whether it passes the regulatory and legal checks, I hope it does go out. I think there's a lot for people to benefit. Muslims, Christians, non-believers, certainly those who are from the right and a certain spectrum of the right. I hope that this conversation is something for you to take away with you and for you to reflect on your way back to Shropshire that, you know, I had a perception of Islam and Muslims once, and the very experience from the moment I saw you at the lobby to the moment you've been up here, you've met loads of people. You've met lots of Muslims. You met a Jamaican Muslim who's filming right now, Brother Jamal. You've met Brother Ubaidah from Iraq. You met Rosh Muhammad Saleh, my editor. You've met many. In fact, I don't think you've actually seen a non-Muslim in this building today, have you? You know, so
I'm the only white man in the building.
The only white man. So and oh yeah, I've got
that's true. Yes, that's true.
And you've been treated with respect,
total respect and friendship, and kindness.
Yes, but it's also important to know that there is a grievances, and this podcast won't sort that.
Yep.
And I wouldn't blame if I don't change the single opinion of a single Muslim if they still hold on to those views about you from that. But I hope this podcast goes out in the platforms which you could benefit. Again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Brothers and sisters and friends and foes, I hope you enjoyed today's engagement as much as I did in terms of perceptions, opinions, exchanges. If you enjoyed this episode, you enjoyed this season, do remember to subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel. Of course, you can find this show on all the major audio platforms. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.